Join me today as we talk about the 1980s fantasy film Excalibur. This is the Geek Cabal channel. My name's Bobby, and today we're going to be talking about Excalibur, a film from the 1980s that follows the Arthurian legend and is named after the sword that Arthur supposedly had that entitled him to rule all of England. So, uh, yeah, that's a hell of a movie. I've seen it several times over the years. I am unfortunately not well versed in Arthurian legend, so I have no idea how accurate this is to any of it. Like the bits and pieces I've picked up from other movies and everything, which in retrospect I realize is primarily this movie, though. From other things, it seems to have, in the broad strokes, seems to be accurate. But I have not read, what is it, Le Morte d'Arthur, which is what this is based on, and I've not read like The Once and Future King. So, it's all just kind of cultural osmosis, which probably all comes from this movie because this is like one of the more well-known versions. The main other version I've seen was it First Night, which took a very what if this were like a grounded, real world approach? Like what if Arthur really was a king in England and this, that, and the other, and took all the fantasy and magic elements out of it. Which okay, it's an all right movie. The one and only time I watched it was in theaters when it was out. Probably need to rewatch it at some point, though. Sean Connery is always good as a medieval king. So anyway, so who do we have in this movie? I had to write all this down because tired of doing these things. Be like, well, there's this guy and this other guy. And no, so we have Nigel Terry as Arthur. Now, looking through his IMDb page, I didn't recognize anything else he was in other than an episode of Highlander, and without going into it, I have no idea which one. So, yeah, he's been in other stuff though, and yeah, so that's the thing. Then we have Helen Mirren as Morgana. Now, Helen Mirren, I shouldn't really need to explain who she is, but just in case, you have probably seen her in several other movies at this point. But some movies that we may or may not talk about at various points on here. She was in both of the Red movies as a British assassin. Yeah, she's also in 2010. Was it The Year We Make Contact? I think is the subtitle of that. That's the sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey. I might talk about those two movies at some point because I really feel you need to watch them both. One, to get some answers to your questions, but also to get new questions that you'll never get answers to, and also just a contrast two movies that are supposedly in the same universe, same reality, that's just not possible. But I'll talk about that if I ever do get around to talking about those two movies. Then we have, I'm assuming it's pronounced Nicole, because it's a guy, not Nicole, but I'm going to assume it's Nicole Williamson as Merlin. Now, the main other thing I've seen him in was the movie Spawn. He's Cogliostro, a former bearer of the Spawn mantle, who's now also trying to dethrone the Malebolgia in hell. Then we have Gabriel Byrne for the first 10-15 minutes of the movie as Uther Pendragon. That's Arthur's father. For those of you that don't know, Arthur's last name is Pendragon. Then Liam Neeson as Gawain. And again, I assume I don't need to explain who Liam Neeson is, but if I do, go watch the Taken movies or any number of other movies where he plays a guy with a certain set of skills out to kill some other guys who severely underestimate him. Or check out my review of Darkman and go watch that because that's better than most of those other movies. Um, he's definitely like stuck in like a kind of typecasting. Or go watch The Phantom Menace where he plays Qui-Gon Jinn. God, I can't believe I almost forgot that. Um, yeah. So there's some options for him. I've not seen all of it, but Rob Roy is pretty good. You check that out. Then Patrick Stewart as, I believe it's Leon deGrance is how you pronounce his name, which I'm assuming by the spelling and by the pronunciation in the movie and who he's related to. I believe he is probably supposed to be a character of French descent, but I could be mistaken. And he is Guinevere's father. Yes. Maybe uncle, but I believe father. And again, Patrick Stewart, go watch Star Trek The Next Generation or Picard. Or the 1980s version of Dune to see him play Gurney Halleck so you can compare him to Josh Brolin if you really feel like it. Because Josh Brolin never got cool scenes of having to run holding the royal dogs while shooting down Harkonnens. So, yeah. But Patrick Stewart never got to play a little tune, one is like space future stringed instrument. So give and take. Yeah. So there's obviously all kinds of other people in the movie, but those are the main people that I think people would recognize and or need to know for us to proceed here. So it follows Uther Pendragon. Obviously, I'm about to get into spoilers, but this is from a movie from the 80s about an English legend from, I don't know, 1,000 years ago. So, this would be like me telling you that I'm going to spoil The Art of War or something. Like, you had time to check it out. So, anyway, here we go. So, what's it about? Well, it's about King Arthur. And it starts off with Uther Pendragon, and Merlin is counseling him, basically telling him, "Hey, look, you're the greatest chance of uniting the land. You've got the strongest army. You're a potential good ruler." And then Merlin is able to get Excalibur for him, and which gives him, it's the Sword of Kings, forged back at the dawn of time. Just so happens to look like an English broadsword, and or a hand and a half sword, maybe, I don't know. The distinctions between those are not my specialty. But yeah, so he uses this to bring about peace with the last guy that he's fighting, and just off the top of my head, I can't think of that gentleman's name. Unfortunately, should have written that down. But then he sees the guy's wife, and is like, "Oh, Merlin, I must have her." Merlin's like, "Well, I mean, I can make that happen, but obviously bad things are going to happen as a consequence." He's like, "Don't care. She's beautiful. Got to do it." So, Merlin makes him a deal. Says that, hang on. He says that there will be a child from their union, and it'll be a boy. It'll be a boy, and that Merlin will be able to take the boy and raise him, and hopefully make him a better man. So Merlin uses the spell of making to summon the dragon. And for those of you who have seen some other movies, the spell might sound familiar. Now, I don't want to be like in every single one of these reviews I do talk about, oh, well, here's where this was referenced in Ready Player One. Because probably every single movie I've done a review for has a reference somewhere in Ready Player One. Or damn near all of them anyway. So, but this one in particular is a plot point in the movie. So that's why I'm going to mention it. At the end of Ready Player One, they have an orb that creates a force field to keep everyone out while they are trying to brute force their way to find the last key to win the ultimate prize. And the chant to activate and deactivate the orb is the spell of making chant from Excalibur that Merlin uses to summon the dragon. And minor side note, when I was watching Ready Player One the whole time, I was like, I have heard this somewhere before. This isn't just random gibberish. What is this? And I had to look it up. And then I felt really silly because I should have definitely known that. But anyway, so he does that to summon a massive mist so that Arthur or Uther can get into the other guy's castle. Then he also uses a spell to disguise him as the other gentleman. So he comes in disguised, sleeps with the guy's wife. Also, side note, yes, there is nudity at various points in this movie, and various sex scenes. So so he sleeps with her, and he leaves. While he was there, the guy he's pretending to be got killed. So then, like the next day, or a couple days later, he strolls in because the other guy is dead, which means his army is basically defeated. Uther is now the king. And so he comes in, and eventually the woman realizes, like after the baby's born, that it was Uther using magic to sleep with her. And then Merlin shows up and wants the baby. And the baby's Arthur. So Uther knows that he doesn't have a choice because, one, he made a deal, and two, Merlin is a wizard. So he gives him the kid. Then Morgana, she is his older sister, well, half sister, same mother, different father, and she gives Merlin like a knowing look, like she knows what's up here. So he takes the baby. Uther goes out after him eventually, like, I can't let him take he's my heir, my son. I can't let this happen. This is an affront to me. Then he gets ambushed by guys that I believe were loyal to the guy that he got killed, and so then Uther gets killed, and he's stabbed, and as he's dying, he's next to a giant rock, takes the sword, and stabs it into the rock, which even Merlin didn't expect that. Goes and sees it, and he's like, well, I guess the sword's stuck in the stone now. That's spectacular. Then it cuts forward to several years later. Arthur is now a gentleman has raised him who's a knight, and his son is a knight, and I can't remember off the top of my head which knight he is. But they've also been raising Arthur, and he's the knight's squire, and he's been telling about chivalry and all this kind of stuff, and because the kingdom has kind of fallen into banditry, and the older knights no, this isn't what a knight's about, and things like this, and but he lost his brother's sword, so he has to go back to the tent and get it. Some kid stole it, follows him, kid leads him out into the woods. He sees the sword in the stone and just pulls it out and takes it to his brother, and or his brother shows up and sees that he did that, and then everyone sees the sword's out, and so they all come running, and the dad asks the son, did you pull it out? And initially he says yes, and he's like, no, I cannot in truth say that. I did not do that, because the temptation was there, because whoever has the sword is the king. But he, after that momentary hesitation of giving in, he does the right thing, because his father raised an honorable man, and so you get a little glimpse of the kind of mentality that Arthur's been exposed to his whole life. And then he's like, no, my brother Arthur pulled it. I didn't do this. This is Arthur's glory. He's the one to be king. So they don't know what to do, and they're like, well, if he pulled it out once, and so his dad counsels him to put it back into the stone, and then he pulls it out again in full view of all these other knights, because several of them come up and try to pull it out. Then he removes the sword, and then that's when he's like, whoa, father. He's like, well, I'm not actually your father. Merlin entrusted me to raise you, your dad is actually Uther Pendragon. And then Merlin shows up, and he's like, well, I guess you're the king now. And Patrick Stewart throws in his lot with Arthur because he's like, hey, look, we all understood what was going to happen here. Like, if someone pulled the sword out of the stone, like, he's supposed to be the king. That's the way this works. And everyone's like, it's just a boy. We go, So, war starts, and Arthur rides in with the knights that are loyal to him, saves Patrick Stewart and Guinevere. And, yeah. So then the knights swear fealty to him, and that's the beginning of him being king. And he gets the other guys to his side whenever one of them's like, I won't surrender to a mere boy. You're not even a knight. And he's like, you're right. I'm not. He's like, so you can make me a knight. You're a knight. And, then we'll be equals. And he does that. Merlin's surprised, and he hands him Excalibur. He's like, what the hell's going on here? Like, this gave away the Sword of Kings. Yeah. So he does knight him, and that becomes the beginning of the knights. And then once they've kind of settled everything, and he falls for Guinevere whenever he sees her. And Merlin's like, oh, God, not again. Because he asks her, like, because he asked Merlin, could you make her fall in love with me? And he's like, I could, but I'm not going to. And then she comes over, and she's got a cookie, and she's like, oh, I made these just for you. And Merlin's like, well, if that's not the perfect metaphor for life and love, he's like, it's tempting, but you don't know what's in it until you've taken a bite, and by then it's too late. And he turns his head, and Arthur eats like half the cookie, and he turns back, he's like, too late. So Merlin definitely is there's some comedic elements to Merlin's portrayal. I mean, he's serious, but he also has those just like, I don't want to call it gallows humor, but he definitely has some humor at various points of just like, oh God, why am I among such stupid people? Because he's an all powerful sorcerer. He's knows all this stuff about things from like going back to the dawn of time, and knows magic, and like secrets of the universe kind of stuff. So as the movie progresses, they build the castle, the round table, and all that kind of stuff. Morgana displays to Merlin that she does know some magic, and he teaches her some more. She's there in Arthur's court because Arthur, acknowledges that she's his sister and everything. And she ends up kind of shacking up with Gawain for a while. Then let's see. Yes, they build the castle, the round table, and all that. Then Arthur marries Guinevere, and it's kind of after that ceremony because it's a Christian ceremony. Oh, and they meet Lancelot. He has come from across the sea and is looking for a king worthy of him. Arthur beats him. He uses Excalibur to basically cheat fate because Lancelot is the superior fighter. But whenever he does, it breaks the sword. And he looks at Merlin. He's like, "What have I done?" And Merlin's like, "You broke the unbreakable. Like this exists since the dawn of time. Like, what have you done?" And he's like, "I don't know, Merlin. Like, I cheated. Like, I'm not worthy of the sword. Like, I this man should have beaten me, but in my vanity, I had to defeat him." And so he throws it back into the lake, and then the lady of the lake raised the sword back whole again, and he takes it, and Lancelot's like, I swear fealty to you, and yeah, so that's how all that kind of goes down. Then it reaches a weird point where obviously magic exists, magic artifacts, things like this, but also Christianity exists. And Merlin even has a comment at one point that like, that the old way is, these things are leaving the world, his day is done, magic is basically done, and now is the time of the one God. And so it's stated in such a way that the two coexist, which is an interesting approach. And again, since I haven't read the background, I don't know what all is there, because I know that another part of this definitely relies on Christianity being a thing. And I'll get to that here in just a second. But also magic. So yeah. So, it goes along a little bit. Gawain accuses Guinevere and Lancelot of having an affair behind Arthur's back. Um, then Lancelot had taken in Percival, who was a thief and beggar, and took him in as his squire. And then whenever Lancelot it looked like he wasn't going to show up for the trial by combat, Percival was going to take his place as his squire. And I think he had to be knighted for that to happen. But then Lancelot showed up and defeated Gawain, and so the matter was settled, even though they were having an affair. And eventually, Morgana is trying to convince Merlin to teach her the chant of making so she can summon the dragon. And some things happen, and basically Merlin gets trapped, but she learns the chant, and so she uses it to make herself more powerful and to retain her youth and beauty. Then she proceeds to sleep with Arthur disguised as Guinevere to bear a son who is Mordred. So then Arthur is hit by a lightning bolt while praying, and he is dying, and since he is one with the land is dying. So the knights set out on the great quest to find the Holy Grail, which is the only thing that can restore Arthur. A lot of them die in the process because they just kind of, I guess, assumed it was in England somewhere and just head out across the land. Kind of like the beginning of the Pokemon theme song, traveling across the land, searching far and wide. Except they're only after one thing. And a lot of them die. This part of the movie a lot follows Percival, because for those of you that know the Arthurian legend, this part I do know, Percival's the one who finds the Grail. And he confronts Mordred and gets attacked. They leave him for dead. Then eventually see Mordred, becomes an adult. But then Percival finds the Grail and takes it to Arthur, and Arthur recovers, gains his strength back, finds Lancelot comes and joins the battle. He's been living among beggars and whatnot, basically saying that Arthur's a false king and this, that, and the other, and because of his betrayal of Arthur, of sleeping with Guinevere. Guinevere went and joined a convent, and Arthur goes and visits her, and she's been holding on to Excalibur for him all this time. So he gets the sword back, and he gives her some interesting comments, basically saying that destiny was always going to screw them, because he was always destined to be more than just a man, to be the king, to be the one that unites everything. And as such, he had to be that before he could be a husband, and it wasn't fair to her. And that he sincerely hopes that in the life thereafter that the two of them will be together. So, it's a touching moment in the movie. Then he and the knights go to take on Mordred, and Merlin has gained a measure of freedom from his prison, and he goes and he visits Arthur and tells him, this is the last time you'll see me, because this is the last of my power. After this, I'll be gone. But he goes to Morgana in her dreams and gets her to summon the dragon. And by that, you don't ever actually see a big physical dragon. It's kind of like a metaphor for exercising their power. But it takes a lot out of them. Because Merlin mentioned early on, when he cast the spell to do everything he did there at the beginning of the movie for Uther, that he had to sleep through, I think he said 9 moons, which I don't think he meant 9 nights. I think he meant 9 lunar cycles. So 9 months to regain his strength. So whenever she does, she loses her grip on her other powers, and she ages dramatically. Then Mordred comes in and sees this old crone, doesn't know who it is, and kills her. Then there's the big mist, which makes it so he can't just attack Arthur's army, and gives them time to set up. And then comes the final epic battle which ends with Mordred and Arthur fighting to the death, which ends up being mutual. And then Arthur bids Percival to take Excalibur and throw it into the nearest body of water. He leaves and he comes back and he's like, I couldn't do it, Arthur. Because Arthur's like, was the lady there? And he's like, I couldn't do it. Like, it's the sword of kings. It'll unite the land. Like, you have to name it a successor or something. And Arthur's like, no, Percival, like, the time for that, it'll come again someday, but today is not that day. And so then he goes and throws it, and the lady on the lake catches it, and then he comes back, and Arthur's gone. And he sees his body is on board a ship, presumably going to Avalon. But that's the other part of the myth that I know. But yeah, so overall, it's a good movie. It's well acted. It's got a very, very fantastic quality to it. Almost like a fairy tale. Like literally, like the scenes. A lot of them are filmed. I think there's some kind of filter on the camera to give them like a dream-like quality, where you just feel like you're being sucked into an old tale being told by someone, with these, larger than life characters and colorful characters. And, you can tell that obviously it skips over parts, but, you've got like I said, you've got the chunk of Uther, you've got Arthur becoming king, pulling the sword from stone, becoming king, meeting Lancelot, building Camelot in the Round Table, Morgana betraying him, Mordred, the quest for the Grail, and then Arthur's death. It hits all the high notes. So, most of the stories there. Definitely some material to inspire your role-playing game campaigns in there, I'm sure. Not going to do a separate video on that. Just know that, yeah, it's definitely there. I mean, there's, the quest, the colorful NPCs, things like that. But, yeah, this is definitely like peak 80s sword and sorcery movies here. Lots of both, lots of combat, lots of armor that's probably not overly practical, because you'll notice that like you'll keep seeing the same types of armor, and by that I mean like there's certain like helmets and stuff that are clearly like fantastic in design that'll keep showing up. Like whoever the bad guy is at any given moment, his guys are typically wearing black armor, and they have helmets that kind of look like almost like a pig head or a bear maybe. And like it's easy to tell who the heroes are because they're in the shining armor, literally knights in shining armor. So yeah, you got a bunch of that going on. Like I said, you've got Merlin, who has an interesting take on things at any given point. Morgana waiting in the wings, just ready to betray Arthur and poison everything. So yeah, it's a good movie. Easily like 8.5, maybe a 9. It's definitely up there. So let me know down in the comments if you have seen this movie, or if you're going to watch it based on this video, or watch it again maybe. If you've seen it, let me know what you think. Any particular moments you think are your favorites, or are there any other movies like this you like? Because when I was looking this up on the Internet Movie Database, there's a thing down at the bottom, similar movies or something like that, and I have seen all but 2 of the ones that recommended, and I was just like, yeah, that's about right, because it was just like just a string of 80s sword and sorcery movies basically. So that was pretty funny, except for the ones that weren't sword and sorcery movies that are not entirely certain why they were recommended. But yeah, so overall, pretty good movie, definitely worth a watch in my opinion. I know I've been doing a lot of 90s sci-fi movies lately, but I'm going to start kind of branching out, and especially as I'm recording this, it's still September, but it'll be October by the time this goes up. So you definitely look forward to horror movies in our little discussions here coming up which will probably be a whole lot of them from the 80s, because, in my opinion, the 70s and 80s were like peak horror movie decades. Uh, we'll do some from the 90s though, because I'm in the 90s movies kick with the other videos. So, plus there are some good horror movies from the 90s. But yeah, and we'll do some 90s fantasy movies too. Not nearly as many of those, but they're out there. So anyway, like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. It's YouTube, you know how this goes. But sharing and commenting are the things that help us grow the channel the most, and we always appreciate that. But otherwise, that's all I've got. So see you folks at the movies.